At the end of the Ming Dynasty, the Qing army invaded, Liaodong was in turmoil, and the country's generals were leaning. Science student Zhu Jian's soul pierced through the last helmsman of the Ming Empire, Emperor Chongzhen. Under his leadership, the Ming Empire, which had accumulated heavy burdens and was unable to return, was bound to embark on a different path. The soldiers of the Ming Dynasty crossed mountains, rivers, and oceans, annihilating all enemies that could pose a threat to the empire. The powerful Eight Banners Iron Cavalry in the First Empire, which had stood for nearly 1,000 years, were all swept away by the peak of the Ming army, breaking their swords and sinking into the sand. Also, as vassal states of Korea and the Japanese slaves on overseas islands, if they want to avoid the fate of extinction, they must offer their territorial wealth and listen to the teachings of the wise men of the Ming Dynasty. Zhu Youjian stood tall with his sword at the top of the Forbidden City, his fingers pointing forward. I want the flag of the Ming Dynasty to be planted in every corner. Main characters: Zhu Youjian, Zhang Yan. Keywords of the novel. I was the emperor at the end of the Ming Dynasty without a pop-up window. I was the emperor at the end of the Ming Dynasty. Download the complete text and read the latest chapter of I Was the Emperor at the End of the Ming Dynasty. Chapter 1. Year title Chongzhen. You are listening at Novel Full.audio. In the 7th year of the Tianqi reign of the Ming Dynasty, it was already autumn in August, but the city of Beijing was still as hot and dry as summer. The scorching sun hung high in the clear sky, and from time to time, pedestrians looked up at the sun above their heads, wiped away sweat from their foreheads, and cursed harshly. This damn weather. The door of Prince Xian's mansion creaked open, and a 17-year-old boy hurriedly walked out of the mansion with several palace eunuchs and sat in a sedan chair. Get up the sedan. Under the shout of Eunuch Liaodong, the sedan bearers carried sedan chairs towards the direction of the palace. Dozens of guards waiting around the sedan chairs immediately urged the warhorses to move forward and clear the way. These guards are all dressed in red and yellow military uniforms, riding 8-foot-tall horses, with bright swords and spears, bright armor, and hanging swords from their waist. They are the genie guards of the Ming Dynasty, whose officials and civilians have turned pale. The cooperation of the sedan chair driver is tacit understanding, making the sedan chair like a small boat in the water, light and stable, but the people in the sedan chair are not in the mood to enjoy this comfort. Zhu Jian closed his eyes, and beneath his handsome and delicate face were a multitude of thoughts. Even after 3 days, everything around him remained as illusory as a dream. As a science-oriented otaku, he never dreamed that crossing time would happen to him. After crossing time, he had a new name. Zhu Youjian. It was the Chongzhen emperor in history who worked hard to save the Ming Dynasty. He spent 3 days digesting the vast information in Zhu Youjian's mind and received a decree. The imperial edict was sent by Empress Zhang of the heavenly Qi emperor, informing him that the emperor was no longer capable and urging him to prepare for his accession. No matter what happened in the palace, she would do her best to facilitate this matter. If there is a decree to enter the palace, everything must be careful. With the genie Wei leading the way, the sedan chair came lightly and steadily to the outside of the Forbidden City. Your Highness, we are at our destination. The voice of Eunuch Wang Cheng'en in the prince's mansion woke Zhu Youjian up and he got off the sedan chair. Zhu Youjian looked at the familiar and unfamiliar vermilion walls of the Forbidden City, filled with emotions in his heart. This majestic imperial city witnessed the rise and fall of the Ming and Qing dynasties. He had come here in later generations and was deeply impressed by the grand scale of the Forbidden City. However, he never dreamed of visiting it again more than 300 years ago. Moreover, it won't be long before I can become the owner of this place. The thought of that full sense of achievement has relieved my nervousness by 2/3. Not long after following Li Yongzhen's footsteps, an old eunuch with fair beard, hair, and skin ran up to meet him. Seeing the instinctive tightness of Zhu Youjian's body, it was none other than Wei Zhongxian, the first powerful minister of the Ming Dynasty today. Originally, Zhu Youjian had not been to the Forbidden City for 9 months to avoid the attention of Wei Zhongxian's henchmen. When they met again, Wei Zhongxian ran over to him and respectfully bowed, "I pay my respects to His Highness, Prince Xian." This respect left Zhu Youjian somewhat bewildered. In his memory, Wei Zhongxian was only so humble when he was 7 or 8 years old, still a lowly eunuch. After a few breaths, Zhu Youjian, who had reacted, lifted Wei Zhongxian with both hands. Now that Emperor Tianqi had gone, as the future emperor, he didn't know what to call Wei Zhongxian for a moment. The 3 words, 9,000 years old, almost broke through his mouth, and he had to hastily say, "Hurry. Please get up. Your Highness's hospitality has greatly impressed the old servant." Wei Zhongxian lowered his head, "The officials are waiting in the Wenhua Hall. Please follow the old servant, Your Highness." In the Wenhua Hall, the officials led by the chief assistant Huang Liji have already stood still. In the center of the hall, the eunuch Wang Tiqian, holding a bright yellow imperial edict in both hands, is the final decree of the Emperor Tianqi. Zhu Youjian suppressed his excitement and knelt in front of the edict. Behind him, the officials knelt heavily, leaving only Wei Zhongxian standing still, squinting at Zhu Youjian in front of him. His small eyes flickered with eerie brilliance. Wang Tiqian spread out the edict and recited it aloud, "If a man dies and lives to understand reason, it is inevitable for him to do so. However, if he continues to unify and obtain people, the people of the clan can rely on him, and they all submit and accept it. How can I regret it?" The 5th younger brother of the emperor believed in the king, who was intelligent and had a long history of filial piety and benevolence. Therefore, he submitted a memorial to his ancestors, instructing his younger brother to pass on the throne. The preface was written by Pai Shaoluan, which is the title of emperor. Diligently cultivate virtue, be diligent in learning and governing, be lenient in caring for people's livelihoods, strictly guard the border, and avoid excessive damage. Both internal and external civil and military officials, big and small, work together to assist, abide by the rules and regulations, and safeguard the imperial map. Amidst the cries of countless officials, the final edict was recited, and all the officials exclaimed, "I will abide by the imperial edict of the late emperor." Wei Zhongxian walked with small steps to Zhu Youjian's side and respectfully said, "Your Highness, I have received the imperial decree from the late emperor. I hope you will follow the imperial decree and ascend to the throne as soon as possible." Zhu Youjian shook his head and said, "How dare I, King Hida, dare to succeed to the throne? Your esteemed officials have been elected as virtuous residents." After speaking, under the guidance of Wang Tiqian, Zhu Youjian walked into the West Nuan Pavilion and waited for the officials to submit their reports. Inside the West Nuan Pavilion, Zhu Youjian closed his eyes and calmed his mood. As long as he finished the 3 lines of drama, he could become the emperor of the Ming Dynasty. However, when he thought about the situation he would face later, he couldn't be happier. Wei Zhongxian's claws and fangs spread throughout the court and fields, and the renowned Donglin party is now being suppressed to the death by Wei Zhongxian. Even if he becomes emperor, he cannot exercise the power of emperor with Wei Zhongxian. As a science student, he only remembers the general history of the late Ming Dynasty and does not know the details. So the question is, how did Zhu Youjian in history defeat Wei Zhongxian? When the 3rd persuasion of commendation was delivered, Zhu Youjian hesitated for a moment and still picked up the wolf hair and wrote an edict on top. Not long after the commendation was sent out, cheers from the officials outside the hall rang out. All officials who were not eunuchs sincerely hoped that the soon-to-be enthroned Prince Xian could sweep away the eunuch's legacy and restore a clear and bright court. During the period of power transfer, the busiest was undoubtedly the Ministry of Rites. The officials of the Ministry of Rites had not yet prepared for the funeral of Emperor Tianqi, and had to rush to prepare for the accession of the new emperor. During this period, Zhu Youjian could only stay in the West Nuan Pavilion, waiting for the Ministry of Rites to inform him of the date of accession. Sitting in the West Nuan Pavilion, Zhu Youjian was already imagining everything he would do after ascending the throne. He may not have the same profound understanding of politics as the original Zhu Youjian, but he had an understanding of history and knew some loyal and useful generals. He would not be as skeptical as the historical Zhu Youjian, who did self-destruct the Great Wall. Your Highness, come to the Shangshu to seek an audience. Wang Tiqian's voice rang outside the door, and Zhu Youjian breathed a sigh, let him in. The door was pushed open, and in came Li Zongdao, the Minister of Rights. Li Zongdao bowed slightly and presented a piece of paper to Zhu Youjian, saying, Your Highness, the Ministry of Rights has proposed 4 names for you to choose from. Zhu Youjian lowered his head and saw 4 era names written on the vast cloth, namely Qiansheng, Xingfu, Xianjia, and Chongzhen. At a glance, Zhu Youjian locked onto the last 2 characters of Chongzhen. He picked up the wolf hair on the table and added 2 more strokes on the character of Zhen, becoming Zhen. Only then did he satisfactorily circle the characters of Chongzhen and say, that's it. Do you choose this? In the eyes of Li Zongdao, a glimmer of light flashed through his eyes. Each of the 4 reign titles had its own profound meaning. King Xian chose Chongzhen, indicating that he was an elegant person. In the first round of exploration, he had already gained a preliminary understanding of Zhu Youjian. As soon as the sect left, officials from the Imperial Academy arrived again and said, Your Highness, tomorrow is an auspicious day. Please prepare for your ascension to the throne. Chapter 2. Climbing 95. You are listening at Novel Full.audio. On August 24, the 7th year of the dawn of the Ming Dynasty, the rising sun brought a glimmer of vitality to the gloomy Ming Dynasty. The red walls and blue tiles of the Forbidden City looked particularly radiant under the sunlight. In the West Nuan Pavilion, 5 palace maids gently waited on Zhu Youjian to dress. Today, Zhu Youjian wore 13 sparse crowns on his head, a yanlong robe, a white luo jade belt tied around his waist, and a sword of the emperor hanging around his waist. He walked out with the support of eunuchs on both sides. The carriage was already prepared outside the warm pavilion, and Zhu Youjian boarded it. Under the protection of more than 3,000 jinui, he sailed towards the imperial palace in a grand manner. The civil and military officials had already put on their court uniforms and were waiting for him there. In front of the Huangji Hall, Zhu Youjian stepped on the back of Wang Tiqian and came to the sect to spread out the edict, reading aloud. The edict says, Our country is ranked as a saint, Swa Qingxiu Lai, Hualong secular beauty, tired and heavy, far hanging 10,000 sacrifices. I will act as the emperor, benevolent and tolerant of heaven, English and Mashi Xian Gu, inspiring spirits and late night sleeps, sharp considerations and security. The sea and the universe will see quickly, and the territory will be reformed. There was a hint of solemnity in the voice of Li Zongdao, making the atmosphere even more serious. Zhu Youjian climbed the jade steps of the Imperial Extreme Hall and walked step by step towards the position of the ruler of the world. When he sat on the dragon chair, he felt not the joy of becoming emperor, but the heavy burden given by the empire with a population of 200 million. The former Ming Empire was like a luxurious manor, exposed to its decline and decay after more than 200 years of wind and rain, and this manor had to face the fierce winds and rain of the Little Ice Age. From now on, every decision he makes will lead to a series of impacts, just like Emperor Chongzhen in history. At this time, Zhu Youjian also believes that he has the ability to restore this estate to its original appearance. The officials slowly entered the hall and praised the officials, saying loudly, The new emperor ascends to the throne, and the officials pay their respects. It is undeniable that when Zhu Youjian saw everyone bowing to him, he felt an unprecedented pleasure, as he immersed himself in it. Boom! Without any warning, there was a thunderbolt that shook the sky. Everyone inside the hall turned to look, and the sky outside turned eerie red at some point. The sunrise on the horizon now appeared dim and lifeless. In the distant sky, another thunderbolt rolled in, and the sound was initially extremely dull, as if hiding a great conspiracy. The most fearful among the officials is undoubtedly the imperial censorate, who predicted an auspicious day for their ascension to the throne. Now that they are born with a different appearance, if the emperor were to hold them accountable, he would be extremely guilty. He quickly went out to pay homage and said, "Your Majesty, the heavenly drums have just sounded, and there is a great drought in the northwest, and there may be a disaster of swords and soldiers." Zhu Youjian frowned and said, "As a warning from heaven, I will abide by it. Today, I have issued the first imperial decree to exempt Shaanxi, and Hunan provinces from paying taxes for 3 years, and to have taxes for the other provinces within 3 years. What? The officials were in an uproar, and the ministers looked at each other. In the end, they all turned their gaze towards Wei Zhongxian beside Zhu Youjian. Zhu Youjian also glanced at Wei Zhongxian and said indifferently, "What do you think of Wei Qing? The changes in taxation by the imperial court, the loss of grey income for local officials, and the lack of money for officials to build an ancestral temple for Wei Zhongxian will also be somewhat affected." Under the gaze of the officials, Wei Zhongxian respectfully said, "Your Majesty, the old servant thinks this order is very good. The old servant believes that not only should it be like this, but also should call on the courtiers to donate money and food. The late emperor rewarded the old servant many times during that time, and the old servant is willing to flush all the 30,000 taels that the late emperor rewarded into the national treasury." Zhu Youjian was first startled, and then his face showed a slight movement. Wei Qing really cared about his family and country. Before the death of the late emperor, he repeatedly instructed him to be a useful person. Today, we know that what the late emperor said is true. When it comes to the late emperor, tears gradually welled up in Wei Zhongxian's eyes, as if he could cry at any moment. Upon seeing his statement, his first assistant Huang Liji immediately stood up and said, "I am willing to donate 3 years of salary to the national treasury." 2 people took the lead, and other ministers spoke out to donate, ranging from tens to hundreds of taels. Zhu Youjian's expression of joy grew stronger and stronger. When there were no more ministers to speak, Zhu Youjian waved his hand. Wei Zhongxian understood and shouted at the top of his voice, "If you have something to report, please leave the court." As he stepped down from the court, Zhu Youjian, dressed in the emperor's dragon robe, with his hands in his waist, hurried along the imperial road leading to the heart-nourishing hall. Wang Qingyan and a group of eunuchs followed closely behind him with small steps. There was a hint of joy in Zhu Youjian's eyes. Wei Zhongxian's attitude was very helpful to him, making him feel the tacit understanding between the emperor and eunuchs. Without Wei Zhongxian's consent today, the tax exemption would not have been so easy to pass. There were also courtiers who contributed less than 100,000 taels of silver, but it made him feel the power of power. The existence of the eunuch party seemed not a bad thing inside the heart-nourishing hall. Zhu Youjian sat in front of his desk, holding a memorial in his hand. He read it very carefully. The memorial next to his desk had already piled up 2 1-meter-high hills, and outside the hall, there were also eunuchs using carts to deliver it inside. Emperor Tianqi was addicted to woodworking and entrusted all political affairs to Wei Zhongxian. To understand what Wei Zhongxian had done and the current situation of the empire, reading memorials was the simplest and most direct way. "Your Majesty, Your Majesty." Zhu Youjian was mesmerized when Wei Zhongxian's voice suddenly came. Looking up, Wei Zhongxian hurriedly ran up to the hall. Due to his impatience, his black hat was crooked and his white hair was scattered haphazardly, appearing disheveled. Zhu Youjian put down the memorial and smiled slightly at him. "Why did Wei Qing come?" Wei Zhongxian glanced at the dozens of obviously red memorials on Zhu Youjian's right hand and felt uneasy. He quickly knelt down on the ground and said, "I have to inform Your Majesty that I have found 4 women from good families a few days ago. After some training, I have learned about the etiquette in the palace and have come to offer them to Your Majesty to enrich the harem." After speaking, he waved to the outside of the palace door. With the sound of pearls and jade tapping, 4 women in white palace attire curled up the hall and bowed together, saying, "I see the emperor." The 4 women were extremely beautiful, appearing ethereal against the backdrop of white palace attire. No man in the world would refuse to embrace these four beauties, but they stood behind Wei Zhongxian, appearing particularly eye-catching to Zhu Youjian. I understand the beauty of Wei Qing, Zhu Youjian said calmly. Su Yingyuan arranged the palace for them. An old eunuch behind Wang Chengyan responded and led four women down. Seeing that Zhu Youjian was not interested in women, Wei Zhongxian's eyes flickered with a hint of gloom. However, Zhu Youjian's next sentence brightened his eyes. Wei Qing, I plan to set up a firearms camp in the palace and recruit craftsmen from all over to study firearms. What do you think? Your Majesty is wise. Wei Zhongxian's voice was filled with excitement, and he was happy to see Zhu Youjian, like his brother Zhu Yushao, addicted to something and ignoring the government. The old servant immediately sent someone to handle it. After speaking, without waiting for Zhu Youjian to speak, he slowly retreated. Without saying a word, Zhu Youjian watched as Wei Zhongxian's figure disappeared outside the heart-nourishing hall. His gaze then shifted to Wang Chengyan, the eunuch who had hanged himself with Emperor Chongzhen on the cold mountain in history. A hint of softness flashed in his eyes. Chengyan, I want you to do something. Chapter 3. The Holy Lady. You are listening at novelfull.audio. At night, the Xianing Palace stands like a gentle girl in the night breeze. The hall of the Xianing Palace has just been repaired and looks very magnificent. Every once in a while, there are 10 strong Han generals patrolling back and forth to protect the safety of the palace. Inside the palace, a luxurious woman lay lazily on her side in bed, with a delicate face that had the charm of a young woman. Her figure was graceful and extremely gentle, with only a white veil draped over her body. In the dim candlelight, she exuded a unique charm. At the end of the bed, 2 young girls gently pressed the woman's fair and tender soles like collecting treasures. One girl exerted a little more force, causing the woman's eyebrows to furrow and a kick to hit her face. The girl trembled and quickly released the force from her hand, causing her eyebrows to relax. The woman on the bed is the nurse of Emperor Tianqi, the Hakka clan. At the age of 18, Koinua entered the palace and became the nurse of Emperor Tianqi. Counting back, it has been over 20 years. With more than 20 years of pampering, Koinua, who is in her 40s, looks like a young girl, but has a more charming appearance. A young eunuch slowly walked up to the palace and said in a trembling voice, I would like to inform you, Lady Wang, to request an audience. Koinua squinted her eyes and said, which prince? Yes. It's the king who serves his majesty. Wang Chengyan. The slightly plump red-clothed eunuch next to Zhu Youjian suddenly appeared in Koinua's mind and said calmly, let him in. In no time, Wang Chengyan walked into the hall. With a respectful smile on his face, he knelt in front of the guest-printed moon bed and respectfully said, see the holy lady. Koinua looked at him up and down, then sneered, Wang Chengyan, are you here so late to have some faith in your master? Wang Chengyan didn't care about the impoliteness of the guest printing the moon. I believe it a bit, but it's not for your majesty, but for madam. As he spoke, Wang Chengyan lifted his head and caught a hint of astonishment in the eyes of the Ko family. Your majesty, the young man ascended to the throne, and it is precisely at the time of grand plans. Some people who do not know how to delegate power will be unlucky. The guest frowned and said, Wei Zhongxian. Exactly. He's going to be unlucky, why are you looking for me? He stared at Wang Chengyan, trying to see something from his face, but Wang Chengyan just lowered his head and respectfully said, Madam, the first thing your majesty wants to do when he moves Wei Zhongxian is to move you, madam. Does that little brat dare to touch me? Koinua kicked away the maid who rubbed her feet and sat up straight, feeling both shocked and angry. The favor of Emperor Tianqi had already cultivated her arrogant personality, and even Wei Zhongxian, who was in power, had to rely on her. How could Zhu Youjian, a little brat, dare to touch her? How could she not be angry? Your Majesty is 17 years old, and it is precisely the nature of a young man. There is nothing that a young man dare not do. Now your majesty has this idea. Based on my understanding of your majesty, the edict to send you out of the palace tomorrow night at the earliest will be placed on the table of the heart-nourishing hall. This edict is reasonable and legal, and Wei Zhongxian dare not say anything. After all, madam, you should have left the palace more than 10 years ago. After a moment of silence, Kuinua said, what do you mean? I have a low rank as a servant, but I also have some small skills. As long as my wife is willing to support me, I guarantee that my wife will continue to be honored and favored by your majesty. Please think carefully, madam. There is not much time left for you. Wang Qingyan's words fell, and the palace fell into a deathly silence. The calm guest Eunuch carefully weighed the pros and cons, whether to support Wang Qingyan in seizing the power of Wei Zhongxian or to believe that Wei Zhongxian can maintain power and restrain the emperor. Seeing that the guest Eunuch remained silent for half a day, Wang Qingyan cursed inwardly and continued to speak out. At the age of 9,000, power reigned supreme. Many officials and workers were promoted by him. With such power, he dared not proclaim himself emperor after the funeral of the late emperor. Now that his majesty has ascended the throne, does Wei Zhongxian still dare to usurp the throne? This sentence directly pokes at the weakness of the guest Eunuch. After the death of Emperor Tianqi, she conspired with Wei Zhongxian and others to make him emperor. Even Wei Zhongxian dared not. Even taking a step back and forcing Wei Zhongxian to close the capital, preside over the coronation ceremony, and then force Zhu Youjian to abdicate to Wei Zhongxian's nephew Wei Liangqing or her son Hoguoxing, Wei Zhongxian dared not act, indicating that Wei Zhongxian still maintains a reverence for imperial power. What should I do if I follow you? Madam only needs to show goodwill to your majesty, and if necessary, show her attitude. Other matters will be taken care of by me. Kuinua was a bit surprised, so simple. Wang Qingyan looked up at her, it's just that simple. The next day at dawn, it was not yet dawn. The light in the heart-nourishing hall remained on all night. Zhu Yu examined the memorial for half an hour and only fell asleep half an hour ago. He had a certain understanding of the current situation of the Ming Empire, and the flaws in the Ming system were deep and not irreparable. He had already planned what to do. Not long after falling asleep, he was awakened by a slow voice from Wang Qingyan. Looking up, Wang Qingyan stood in front of him with his body bowed. When he saw him awake, Wang Qingyan's face lit up with joy. Your Majesty, please meet the Holy Lady, he said, not seen. Zhu Youjian woke up full of anger. Your Majesty, it's better for you to meet. This is what you requested. Wang Qingyan whispered to persuade him nearby. Upon hearing his words, Zhu Youjian regained some energy. He sat up and patted his face, then regained consciousness and said, let her in. Obey me. In no time, a graceful figure walked into the heart-nourishing hall, and Zhu Youjian's eyes lit up. Kuinua was wearing a thin smoke emerald green veil, a winding white tassel long skirt that dragged the ground. Her eyes were filled with spring, and the clear waves flowed with hope. On her black long hair, a hollow golden hairpin was inserted diagonally, adorned with a little purple jade. Her delicate appearance was somewhat enchanting, and her red lips were slightly raised. Every move was filled with various customs. Under her skirt, a pair of small white embroidered shoes appeared faintly as she moved her lotus steps. Zhu Youjian looked away to avoid losing face in front of Kuinua. Kuinua seemed to see Zhu Youjian's embarrassment and smiled slightly. She stopped in front of Zhu Youjian and slowly bowed, saying, my servant, Kuinua, pays respects to your majesty. Madam Fengsheng, there's no need to be polite. What's the matter with me at this time? Zhu Youjian's voice was calm and a little tired. I heard that your majesty has not rested all night, so I came to see your majesty. Kuinua smiled sweetly and walked slowly towards Zhu Youjian. When the late emperor was here, he often stayed up all night, and every time it was the maidservants waiting by his side. The late emperor drove a crane to the west, and the maidservants could only feel the warmth of the late emperor by his side. With these words spoken, Koinue had already arrived by Zhu Youjian's side and voluntarily bent down to pour tea. A strange and delicate fragrance seeped into Zhu Youjian's breath from Koinue's body. Zhu Youjian suddenly came to his senses, his drowsiness swept away from his mind. He looked at Koinue's heavily makeup, and a flame ignited in his chest. He pulled Koinue into his arms, and Koinue sat on Zhu Youjian's lap. With a hint of spring, he said, "Your Majesty, please have mercy." Chapter 4. Differentiation. You are listening at novelfull.audio. The morning sun shone on the square in front of the Golden One Hall. Officials looked up at the rising sun and looked down at the Golden One Hall in confusion. It was already time, and the emperor had not yet summoned his ministers to the hall. What was the situation? Wei Zhongxian looked at the increasingly anxious minister and personally stood up to walk towards the heart-nourishing hall. As soon as he approached, he saw Wang Chengyan standing motionless in front of the hall door with his hands in his sleeves. Wei Zhongxian glanced at him and was about to walk inward. Wang Chengyan opened his arms to block his way. "Wei Gonggang, the emperor is busy. You'd better not disturb him." "What is your Majesty busy with?" Wang Chengyan turned his head and glanced at the flickering candles in the hall, then smiled slightly and said, "Your Majesty has been reading the memorial all night." Just as he was about to rest for a while, a nobleman asked to see him. "Your Majesty is currently having a conversation with the nobleman in the hall. We need to see what kind of noble person it is in our family." Wei Zhongxian swung his sleeves and was about to enter. As soon as he took 2 steps, he heard a woman's laughter coming from inside the hall. He suddenly understood, with a sarcastic smile on his face. He stood next to Wang Chengyan, speaking confidently, "Since your Majesty is busy, it's better not to disturb us and our subordinates." Wang Chengyan sneered silently. In less than a quarter of an hour, a woman with slightly disheveled hair walked out quickly, her face still flushed. Wei Zhongxian had already seen the chaos in the palace, but was truly surprised to see the person coming out of the hall. "Koinue, why is she?" As Koinue walked, she tidied up her messy clothes. As she walked past Wei Zhongxian, she only glanced at him and left without saying anything. Wei Zhongxian's eyes gradually showed a hint of injio. "These slutty women." Wang Chengyan took a step forward and said with a smile on his face, "Now it's okay, Lord Wei, let's go in." Wei Zhongxian gave him a fierce glare, his pale eyebrows trembling with anger. His fierce expression seemed to suggest waiting for me. The hall was still filled with the smell of decay. Wei Zhongxian frowned and approached Zhu Youjian, bowing and saying, "I pay my respects to your Majesty." Flat. Wei Zhongxian stood up straight and looked at Zhu Youjian. Zhu Youjian's face was not red, his heart was not beating, and the desk was messy, with memorials, notes, and other items scattered all over the ground. Not long ago, Koinue was serving him on this desk. "Wei Qing has arrived at the right time. I have something to discuss with you." Zhu Youjian stood up and walked over to Wei Zhongxian with his hands on his back. Wei Zhongxian's head lowered. "I thought it was completely unnecessary for eunuchs to practice martial arts. In the future, this kind of activity can be cancelled. What does Wei Qing think?" Wei Zhongxian suddenly looked up, not aloud, and a cold light flashed in his eyes. "Your Majesty's move may not be appropriate. The eunuch's practice of martial arts is to protect your Majesty at a critical moment, and I do not recommend your Majesty to exempt this activity," he said regarding Wei Zhongxian's attitude. Zhu Youjian is not surprised at all. Cancelling eunuch martial arts training activities would have a significant impact on the East Factory, which is dominated by eunuchs. However, Zhu Youjian does not intend to back down on this matter. "What if I insist on doing so?" As soon as Wei Zhongxian looked up, he saw the smiling face of Zhu Youjian. However, his warm smile made Wei Zhongxian notice a hint of crisis and he said with some trepidation, "It's all up to your Majesty's decision." "That's good. Zhu Youjian turned his back and said, "From now on, eunuchs are prohibited from practicing martial arts. If eunuchs are found practicing martial arts, regardless of their position, they will be beheaded immediately." In addition, considering the relaxation of military equipment in the palace, the capital camp guerrilla Zhou was fortunate, and the Liaodong guerrilla Chao Wenzhao entered the palace to reorganize their military equipment. In addition, regarding the northwest military disaster mentioned by the Qingtian Observatory, after careful consideration, I have decided to issue an edict to appoint Sun Chuanting of Wuwei in Daizhou town as the commander-in-chief of Shaanxi, and to appoint Lu Xiangsheng, the prefect of Diaming, as the governor of Shaanxi. The two of them will jointly oversee the military and political affairs of Shaanxi. After speaking, Zhu Youjian turned slightly and said, "My decision has been made." Will Wei Qing refute it? The short number hung over Wei Zhongxian's head like a knife. He dared to refute it by completely tearing his face at the emperor. Wei Zhongxian didn't have the courage to say, "Your Majesty. Your Majesty is clear, I will pass the decree now." "Great, let's also let all the officials disperse. I've been reading the memorial all night and I'm also tired." After Wei Zhongxian was deeply concerned about his mission, he left the palace and arrived at his nephew Wei Liangqing's Ningguo mansion. Along the way, he pondered how to act in front of the new emperor in the future, finding a balance between imperial power and eunuch party. The promotion of foreign ministers by the emperor was not a big deal. Sun Chuanting and Lu Xiangsheng had no connection with him, Wei Zhongxian. It didn't matter which province the emperor transferred them to, but the key was the transfer of Zhou Yuji and Chao Wenzhao. This means that the emperor has started to mobilize foreign ministers to enter the palace. Today, there are 2 warriors, and it is uncertain who will be transferred to the capital in the future. Moreover, the emperor's tough attitude makes him very uncomfortable. Wei Liangqing had already been waiting outside the mansion with his family. After chatting with Wei Zhongxian for a while, Wei's uncle, nephew, wife of Wei Liangqing, and 4 housekeepers gathered at a table to play mahjong. At the mahjong table, Wei Zhongxian temporarily forgot about his unhappiness. Wei Zhongxian himself had a penchant for gambling. Before entering the palace, he gritted his teeth and cut himself off to avoid debt. After entering the palace, he never forgot to gamble and has been gambling ever since. Wei Liangqing also knows his uncle's virtues, and even if he can win, he deliberately loses, actively asking Wei Zhongxian to win the silver. Although it was only a few tens of taels each time, it made Wei Zhongxian enjoy it. Today, the same round of card games went on, and Wei Zhongxian had already won more than 20 taels, with silver piled up like a small hill at hand. At this moment, a servant rushed over and said, "Master, the decree has arrived." As Wei Zhongxian was playing, he turned around and saw Su Yingyuan holding a bright yellow imperial edict as he walked quickly, followed by several blue-clothed eunuchs holding trays of unknown items. The imperial edict arrived, and Wei Zhongxian received it. Wei Zhongxian and others dared not neglect and quickly knelt down to listen to the edict. Su Yingyuan coughed twice before Lang Lang recited, "As luck would have it, the emperor's edict said, the Eastern Factory commander, the chief of rites, and the eunuch Wei Zhongxian, who served for 3 dynasties, worked hard and achieved great success. He bestowed upon Wei Zhongxian's nephew, Duke Ningguo Wei Liangqing, and Wei Liangqing's son, Wei Pengyi, 2 red and iron certificates to honor his kindness and honor him. I, Wei Zhongxian, Wei Liangqing, received the order." Wei Zhongxian raised his head with both hands and respectfully took the imperial edict, feeling a hint of excitement in his heart. Since the founding of the People's Republic of China, the imperial edict and iron coupon were only given to those who had made outstanding contributions to the Wei family. Now, the emperor has given them 2 pieces at once, even Wei Pengyi, who is still in his infancy and breastfeeding, which shows the emperor's trust in their Wei family. In the face of such an honor, the unhappiness of this morning suddenly dissipated, and what caught Wei Zhongxian's attention the most was that the emperor rewarded him with a book and iron coupon, indicating that the emperor was satisfied with him and showing him hope to maintain power during the Chongzhen dynasty. Su Yingyuan handed over the imperial edict and put his hands in his sleeves. 9,000 years old, Your Majesty asked me to send you a message. You need to put in a lot of effort to recruit craftsmen from the firearms camp. If this is done beautifully, Your Majesty will reward you greatly. Wei Zhongxian nodded and calmly took out a 5,000 taels of silver ticket and handed it to Su Yingyuan's sleeve. Su Yingyuan's eyes lit up and he leaned in Wei Zhongxian's ear, saying, Your Majesty, your face is not very good when you see the memorials of officials from various places asking for the name of your ancestral hall. This Wei Zhongxian's face stiffened. If Su Yingyuan didn't remind him, he would have forgotten about this matter. Many of the memorials that the emperor had read recently were from the reign of Emperor Tianqi. At that time, various regions were building ancestral halls for him. After the ancestral hall was built, officials from various provinces wrote letters requesting the name of the ancestral hall. These memorials should have been read by him, but unexpectedly, Emperor Tianqi left too quickly, and the memorials arrived at the table of Emperor Chongzhen. I, Zhu Youjian, pay my respects to Your Majesty. Long live Your Majesty. On the day the decree was issued, Zhu Youjian met Zhu Youjian at the heart-nourishing hall. Zhu Youjian had already worked in the Beijing camp, so he came the fastest. Zhu Youjian was 27 years old this year, with a broad face and often a faint smile on his face, which made people couldn't help but develop a favorable impression of him. He is such an honest person, but he was able to defend Ningwu Pass with a weak army in times of danger, blocking the attack of hundreds of thousands of peasant soldiers by Li Zicheng. Despite being captured alive with several arrows, he still cursed and refused to surrender. In the end, he was shot dead by arrows hanging from a high pole, and his body was dismembered. He can be called a loyal and martyr. Zhou Yuji's wife, Lu Shi, led dozens of women to refuse to defend the public residence, climbed onto the roof to shoot arrows at the peasant army, and was ultimately burned alive. Free of charge and flat. Zhu Youjian's voice was filled with excitement. General Zhou, did you ever guess why I ordered you to enter the palace to reorganize your military equipment? This. I will not know, please make it clear to Your Majesty. Zhou Youjian not only didn't understand this, but also didn't know how the emperor knew about him. Although guerrilla generals like him couldn't be considered a big catch in the Ming army, they were not uncommon. Zhu Youjian held his chest in both hands and said slowly, in the past, Emperor Taizu set up 12 guards in the palace, and in the Yongle dynasty, 10 guards were added. In the Xuande dynasty, 4 more guards were added. These 20.6 guards were nominally under my control, but in reality, the only one I could control was the Genie Guard. I have decided to gather the 20.6 guards and establish 2 armies, the South and the North. I plan to let you lead the South Army, and I will keep them for great use. Upon hearing Zhu Yujian's words, Zhou Yujian immediately frowned. He couldn't believe that the emperor of the Ming Dynasty could not even fully control the power in his own palace. While it was a good idea for the emperor to have this idea at the moment, Zhou Yujian also had his own concerns. I will strictly follow Your Majesty's orders, but the military equipment in the palace is relaxed, and the guards are arrogant. I am afraid that my authority is not enough to command all the departments. You don't need to worry about this, Zhu Youjian waved his hand slightly. I can grant you the right to act conveniently. If there is anyone in the Southern Army who doesn't follow the orders, you can kill them on the spot. Zhou Yujian didn't expect the emperor's determination to be so firm. He immediately said, since that's the case, I will do my best to train a strong army for Your Majesty. The Northern Army is led by Chao Wenzhao, a guerrilla from Liaodong. Before his arrival, do not publicize the matter between the Northern and Southern armies. During this period, I will give you 3,000 taels of silver, allowing you to recruit soldiers near the capital. If you have any trusted brothers in the capital camp, you can also join the Southern Army. Your Majesty, thank you. Chapter 5. Diseases of the Garrison. You are listening at novelfull.audio. In the following days, both inside and outside the palace remained calm as usual. Every morning, Zhu Youjian sat on a dragon chair, watching the courtiers without saying a word. The memorials submitted by the ministers were also suppressed, and the courtiers couldn't figure out what the new emperor was thinking. Although there were rumors in the palace that the emperor was planning to establish a firearm camp, there was an example of Emperor Tianqi. All courtiers regarded this as the emperor's entertainment. Unlike Emperor Tianqi, his older brother played with wooden objects and his younger brother played with firearms. Obviously, his younger brother was better at playing than his older brother. When Cao Wenzhao arrived in Beijing, the news that His Majesty wanted to integrate the palace guards into the northern and southern armies came, and the officials could no longer sit still, especially the cabinet forces led by Huang Liji. In the imperial palace, except for the royal guards, which are nominally controlled by the emperor, the military power of all other guards is in the hands of the cabinet. The emperor needs to integrate the various guards in the palace, making it clear that he is going to seize power. A series of memorials were sent into the Hall of Nurturing the Heart, as if a mud ox had fallen into the sea. His Majesty neither approved nor sent them back. After several days, the emperor seemed to be annoyed by their arguments, not even going to court. He returned the power of the court to Wei Zhongxian's hands, and the form of the court returned to the era of the Tianqi dynasty. In the imperial palace, Zhu Youjian, dressed in deep red armor, lay on the barrel of a red barbarian cannon in the firearm camp, playing with a thunderbolt gun in his hand. Wei Zhongxian was extremely concerned about the formation of the firearm camp. Although the craftsmen have not gathered all the firearms, Zhu Youjian has gathered all the firearms in the Ming army. Upon inspection, he was very disappointed. In his opinion, the firearms in the Ming army were still in a very primitive stage, and even the Hongyi cannons under his buttocks were only mainstream products, not advanced. But there are also several good designs among these matchline guns that caught Zhu Youjian's eye, especially the thunderbolt gun and rocket slip developed by Zhao Shizhen. The rocket slip looks no different from ordinary matchline guns, but it is a rocket launching device with a range far beyond that of a crossbow. As for the thunderbolt gun, it is a single-soldier multi-barrel firearm, also known as a multi-barrel rotating barrel gun. Zhao Shizhen improved it in the last few years of his life and developed the thunderbolt gun, which can fire 18 rounds in a row. It has already taken the prototype of a modern machine gun, but its appearance is somewhat peculiar. The gun body is equipped with an iron axe, which serves as the fulcrum for shooting. The gun barrel is equipped with a shield, and picking up the thunderbolt gun vertically can easily be seen as an umbrella, rather than a firearm. Wei Zhongxian stood with his head down next to the red barbarian cannon, while Yu Guang secretly glanced at Zhu Youjian lying on the cannon, feeling a little flustered in his heart. The emperor spends every day in the firearm camp, saying that he wants to design a new type of firearm, but he always feels that things are not so simple. In a short period of time, he cannot guess what thoughts are hidden behind Zhu Youjian's cloud and light wind appearance. Wei Qing, ah! The old slave is here. Zhu Youjian calmly aimed the muzzle of the thunderbolt gun at Wei Zhongxian. Although he knew there were no bullets inside, the dark muzzle still made Wei Zhongxian's heart skip a beat. He was also the emperor, and the heavenly Qi emperor did not aim a crossbow machine at him. You said, if I abolish the system of the imperial guards, what actions will those courtiers take? Wei Zhongxian's face changed, and even his gaze at Zhu Youjian changed, becoming surprised and profound. Zhu Youjian's thoughts were truly shocking to him. After a while, he said, Your Majesty, the system of the imperial guards has been in use for 100 years. If Your Majesty abolishes the system of the imperial guards, the ministers will report it one after another, or force it to death. Forcing with death. Zhu Youjian gave a cold smile and casually threw the thunderbolt gun to Wei Zhongxian. It's really bothering me. I'll personally take them on the road. It's not that I'm asking you. It's the military households from all over the country. What will their reactions be? They will not support your majesty. If your majesty cancels the imperial guard system, the military households will oppose it, and even more so, they may rebel. Zhu Youjian's eyes turned cold. Wei Zhongxian's answer exceeded his expectations, but soon he understood the details. They don't have land. Your majesty is wise. Zhu Youjian slapped his head and said that reforming the military system would require giving enough land to the original military households. If the military households had enough land, the court could do whatever it took. However, in the mid to late Ming Dynasty, the severe land consolidation also led to the collapse of the garrison system, and the military households gradually became tenants. If the court no longer wanted them, they would truly become tenants. With this in mind, we still need to deal with the landlords first. In the late Ming Dynasty, the wealth of the country was in the hands of the landlord class. After Li Zicheng invaded Beijing, it was evident that 73 million taels of silver were found in the homes of court officials. Seeing Zhu Youjian's discouraged expression, Wei Zhongxian calmed down and said, "Your Majesty, in recent years, various places have been building ancestral halls for the old slave, which has cost a lot of money and food. The old slave wants to request your Majesty's order to prohibit this behavior. All the funds and materials used for building ancestral halls will be sealed as treasury, for future use." Zhu Youjian had anticipated Wei Zhongxian's reaction and looked at him with a smile. "Wei Qing, the people are building an ancestral hall for you. This is the will of the people, it's a good thing." With just one sentence, Wei Zhongxian was sweating profusely. Just as he was about to speak, he saw Zhu Youjian waving his hand to stop him. However, it's good for Wei Qing to have such an idea, but the silver given by the late emperor to build the Xingxi temple has already been distributed by the Ministry of Revenue and cannot be recovered. The temple that has already started construction should be repaired, but those that have not started construction should not be moved again. I'll go and pass the decree now. Wei Zhongxian bowed slightly and slowly retreated. He found that he could no longer understand the 17-year-old young emperor. From the emperor's words and actions, he could not infer what the emperor was thinking about him. Does Emperor Chongzhen believe and trust the emperor and his ministers? Zhu Youjian looked coldly at Wei Zhongxian's back, his originally clear eyes bursting with a burning murderous intent. Wei Zhongxian's eunuch party hindered him from taking power, and this feeling of being tied up was very uncomfortable. We still have to endure it. Zhu Youjian sighed helplessly, and his murderous intent dissipated in his eyes. He cleared up the power imbalance caused by the eunuch party, which he could not bear. The ultimate result was like in the original history, where the Donglin party became dominant and elevated the emperor's power. Now, no matter what, he can still form his own imperial party in the gap between the two forces. Chapter 6. The Crack of the Eunuch Party. You are listening at novelfull.audio. At dusk, inside the heart-nourishing hall, Zhu Youjian sat on the dragon chair, listening attentively to the reports of Zhou Yuji and Cao Wenzhao. The formation of the northern and southern armies was necessary, and he could handle national affairs with peace of mind and have more confidence in fighting against the eunuchs. The stilt attack that occurred in the 43rd year of the Wanli reign was a warning from the past. That year, a person named Zhang Cha broke into the Xiqing palace where the crown prince Zhu Changluo lived, holding a wooden stick, and injured the eunuch who guarded the gate, almost injuring Zhu Changluo. Although Zhang Cha was eventually identified as a madman and hastily closed the case, it is unclear what was hidden behind the incident. The crown prince of the Ming Empire was beaten to the entrance of his palace by a madman holding a wooden stick. No one believed it even when it was said. Even the rural wealthy families would have several guardians, and the madman could not break in. However, the Grand Crown Prince's palace had no soldiers, only 2 old eunuchs guarding it, and one was injured. The Wanli dynasty was only 7 years apart from Zhu Youjian's Chongzhen dynasty, and the situation he faced was even more dangerous than that of the Wanli court. If there was no trusted army by his side, perhaps one day a madman with a wooden stick would attack the entrance of the heart-nurturing hall. Zhou Youjian was the first to speak. "I would like to inform your majesty that our southern army currently has more than 4,000 brothers, all of whom are selected and strong individuals. However, it will take several months of training before we can form the army." Today, Zhou Youjian was wearing a shiny silver armor, which made him look extremely energetic. After speaking, he looked at his colleague Qiao Wenzhao, who was several years older and slightly taller than him. Paired with a black scale armor, he appeared calm and capable. Both of them were recruited by the emperor as guerrillas and became familiar with each other. Qiao Wenzhao clenched his fists and said, "Your Majesty, the last general's northern army has more than 3,000 soldiers, and it will take several months to form an army." Zhu Youjian said, "Qiao Wenzhao, you were once a general in Liaodong, and I ask you, after months of training, the northern army may engage in direct combat with the Tartars." Qiao Wenzhao raised his head and quickly glanced at Zhu Youjian, then lowered his head. There was a hint of emotion in his heart. The emperor had an enterprising spirit, which was good for the soldiers in Liaodong. He wanted to say yes, but he still told the truth, no. Why not? Zhu Youjian raised his voice and asked, "Throughout history, the Han and Tang dynasties fought against foreign aggression and often beheaded tens of thousands of soldiers before returning. What about our great Ming? If we kill 180 Tartars, the whole army will celebrate, and the rewards of the chief will be sent to the Hall of Nurturing the Heart. Qiao Wenzhao, I ask you, why can't my great Ming have the same glory as the Han and Tang dynasties?" This is Zhu Youjian, as the emperor and a traveler, questioning Qiao Wenzhao. Qiao Wenzhao knelt on one knee on the ground, his hands trembling as he clasped his fists. The reason for his difficulty in spitting out was: the military equipment was old, the military pay was low, and he often procrastinated. Even the compensation for his fallen brothers could not be guaranteed, and the soldiers had no hope of dying. Looking at Qiao Wenzhao's trembling hand, Zhu Youjian let out a soft breath and said in a softer tone, "So, as long as I solve these problems, you can give me an army that can fight directly against the Tartars." "Sure. But the training ground needs to be in the suburbs." "That's good." Zhu Youjian stood up and said, "Listen, from now on, each of your soldiers will receive a salary of 48 taels per year. I will give you the sharpest armor, and I will give you the thickest. War victims, regardless of their official positions, will receive 10 years of silver compensation. I will also let you go to the suburbs to focus on military training. In addition, I allow you to recruit soldiers on your own, and you can recruit as many as you want. Are these enough for you two to tell me? If these are not enough, I can still give you the Shangfang sword. Those who hinder military training, even the prince, can be beheaded. In case of any trouble, I will cover it for you." Qiao Wenzhao and Zhou Youjian exchanged a glance and knelt down on their knees. "I, Qiao Wenzhao, Zhou Youjian, am willing to drive your majesty away," they said. Zhu Youjian sat back on the dragon chair and waved his hand, "Go ahead, I'm a bit tired." Zhou and Qiao exchanged a glance and slowly retreated. Just as they were about to leave the heart-nourishing hall, they heard Zhu Youjian's tired voice, "Zhou Youjian, choose a reliable person from those around you to stay, and leave an additional 500 people. The palace guard needs someone to guard it." Zhou Youjian's body trembled and he was about to move forward, but he was stopped by Qiao Wenzhao's arm. Looking at Qiao Wenzhao again, his face was tired and solemn, but there was an indescribable fanaticism in his eyes. In the empty heart-nurturing hall, Zhu Youjian sat on a dragon chair. He had thought a lot about the numerous atrocities committed by the Qing army after entering the border, including the Yangzhou 10th massacre, the Jiating 3rd massacre, the Guangzhou massacre, the Jiangyin 81st massacre, as well as dozens of clearly recorded massacres and countless unrecorded minor massacres. Hu Qi swept across the land of China, causing countless deaths and injuries among the men of the Ming Dynasty. He did not know the exact number of casualties, but after the Three Feudal Rebellion, Wang Ji wrote in his memorial to Kangxi. Sichuan was plagued by disasters, with 100 miles of desolate smoke. In the past, I transported food and crops, and my eyes were devastated. After pacifying myself, I repaired my health and rest, but even though I managed to obtain a provincial household registration, it was still only 18,000 people, not as many as a county in another province. There are only over 18,000 deaths in Sichuan province, which is only one province with records. What about other provinces? The three disturbances have affected most of the south, and how many people will die in other provinces? When reading this record before, he used to be angry. Now that he has become Emperor Chongzhen, if he doesn't do something, the Chinese people will have to die millions more. Let the Manchu wild boar skins, which only had a population of 1 million, enslave the Han family for more than 200 years, leaving behind various indelible humiliations for China before its downfall. Zhu Youjian rubbed his temples, slowing down his mood. He was a bit restless just now, and as the ruler of the empire, he shouldn't have such emotions. At this moment, the eunuch's report came from outside the palace. Your Majesty, Wang Tiqian and Duke Wei are seeking an audience outside. They came together. Zhu Youjian frowned. This was Wei Zhongxian's first time seeking an audience with his minions. What would happen? Zhu Youjian pondered and let the two of them in. Wei Zhongxian and Wang Tiqian walked to the heart-nourishing hall, followed by a dozen or so blue-clothed eunuchs. The eunuchs carried a box in groups of 4, and as they struggled to carry it, the contents of the box weighed heavily. Without saying a word, Wang Tiqian opened the box directly. What appeared in front of Zhu Youjian was a box full of silver ingots, all of which were 12 and 1 ingots. The white silver was placed in front of Zhu Youjian, and Zhu Youjian's heart moved. This box was estimated to be 10,000 taels, and 5 boxes were 50,000 taels. Zhu Youjian only glanced at it and then opened his mouth and asked, "What's going on?" Wang Tiqian said, "I would like to inform your Majesty that an hour ago, Liaodong entrusted someone to suddenly come to the servant's mansion and present these 5 boxes of gold and silver. The servant was frightened and dared not keep them privately. I earnestly request your Majesty to make the decision." It's like this. Zhu Youjian's eyes suddenly flashed with a shred of light. Wei Zhongxian was illiterate, and Liaodong, along with Wang Tiqian, changed the cabinet vote for Wei Zhongxian. There were cracks within the eunuch party, which he was willing to see. Zhu Youjian patted the table, about to get angry, when the sound of the eunuch's report came from outside the palace. This time, it was a group of people, but Wei Zhongxian's face became increasingly ugly as he listened to the eunuch's names. The people he sought to see were all members of the eunuch party. These people came to meet the emperor without reporting to him, which was his contempt. The hand hidden under his sleeve clenched into a fist. If it weren't for the presence of the emperor, he would have been angry and killed. More than 10 members of the eunuch party entered the hall of nurturing the heart, followed by a group of eunuchs carrying boxes, along with 5 brought by Wang Tiqian, totaling exactly 30 boxes, or 300,000 taels. Wei Zhongxian and Zhu Youjian's faces became increasingly ugly. Liaodong is just a eunuch, where did he get so much silver? Wei Zhongxian. I am here. Let the royal guards thoroughly investigate this matter, and all of Liaodong's wealth will be deposited into the national treasury. The old slave immediately went to deliver the decree. The Jin Wei is now under the command of Wei Zhongxian. Let the Jin Wei investigate this matter thoroughly. Liaodong has no good fruit to eat. Before Wei Zhongxian left, he quickly glanced at these eunuch members in the palace. These wall-riding factions must be eradicated. Wei Zhongxian retreated, but his murderous gaze made all members of the eunuch party present tremble with fear. Wei Zhongxian rose from the end of the day and played with all sorts of vulgar methods. If he really wanted to kill someone, they would definitely die unsightly. Some people look at the emperor on the dragon chair with hope and hope, hoping that the emperor can protect them, even if they don't give them any hope. As they thought, Zhu Youjian just glanced at them and said as if responding, "Your esteemed officials, please return to your original positions, and the silver you have paid will be deposited into the national treasury." After speaking, he continued to look down at the memorial. Wang Qingyan knew how to handle these people and didn't need him to worry. Now his attention is focused on the military pay for Cao Wenjiao and Zhou Yuji. According to the salary standards he gave to the two people and the size of the army they requested to expand, he needs to prepare at least 1 million taels of military pay for each army, plus the addition of armor and weapons. The annual investment of an army is not less than 3 million taels, and can only be large but not small. The two armies together amount to nearly 7 million taels. He looked at the treasury and was pleasantly surprised by its silver reserves, which amounted to 3 million taels. The amount of silver he received today, along with the internal funds of Emperor Tianqi, was exactly 9 million taels. Although it looked quite large, it was far from enough. There is a phenomenon of military arrears in various regions, and it is conservatively estimated that it will take more than 20 million taels to fill this hole. It is also necessary to maintain the Guanning-Jin defense line, which requires 5 million taels per year. There was also the silver that needed to be reserved to cope with natural disasters. He vividly remembered that during the more than 10 years of Chongzhen, natural disasters continued, especially in Shaanxi province, where the land was thousands of miles away. Farmers planted their crops, but after the ravages of drought and locust infestations, they could not harvest much during the autumn harvest. Even if they collected some, they had to distribute the majority to the landlords, and the remaining amount had to cope with the high taxes that were being imposed layer upon layer. Usually, the people work hard to cultivate for a year, but in the end, they not only have nothing left, not even enough money to pay taxes. In this situation, not to mention Gao Yingxiang, Li Zicheng, and others, even Zhu Youjian is there. He also rebelled. "I have been farming for a year, why should your court take the last grain from my family?" After sorting it out, under heavy economic pressure, Zhu Youjian couldn't breathe anymore. He didn't regret cutting taxes, and if he didn't cut taxes again, he would start a wave of peasant rebellion next year. In order to nip the seeds of rebellion in the bud, he transferred Sun Chuanting and Lu Xiangxing to Shaanxi, but this was definitely not enough. The situation in Shaanxi province definitely requires the court's funding assistance. Thinking of these recent expenses, Zhu Yu's eyes lit up with murderous intent. A single Li Yongzhen could use hundreds of thousands of taels of silver to bribe. What about those who hold higher official positions than him? Chapter 7. Rebels. You are listening at novelfull.audio. The next day, the first ray of sunshine in the morning gently caressed and licked Zhu Youjian's delicate face like a young girl's palm. Zhu Youjian sat up in a daze, rubbed his sleepy eyes, and shouted to the outside of the hall, "Someone, come here." A young general strode into the hall and clasped his fists, saying, "Your Majesty, what orders do you have?" "Who are you?" Zhu Youjian asked curiously when he saw a general coming in. "I report to your Majesty that General Jia Hua, the commander of the Southern Army, has been ordered by General Zhou to protect your Majesty." The Ming Dynasty army had a distinction between military and military, with each having a military position system, with a total of 440 soldiers under its command. Since you are a trusted confidant selected by Zhou Yuji, you must be a reliable person. Zhu Youjian generously rewarded you, saying, "I appoint you as the commander of my own military camp, ranking third in rank, and grant you the right to bring a sword to the palace. You will always be by my side, and your soldiers will become my own military camp." "Your Majesty, thank you." Jia Hua's voice was resounding and powerful, especially the sharp momentum on his body that he admired. If all the soldiers of the Ming Dynasty could have his strength, they would have already destroyed the later Qing dynasty. Looking at the sky outside, "What time is it now?" "Your Majesty, Mao Shi is almost over." The Mao hour after the Tang dynasty was from 5 to 7 o'clock, which was already very late for Zhu Youjian, who used to wake up before dawn. The palace attendants presented toiletries, and Jia Hua, dressed in military attire, stood beside him with his sword, which was about 5 feet long and had a slender blade that looked extremely intimidating. Jia Hua, you also come from the Beijing camp. Can you tell me about the combat power of the Beijing camp? Jia Hua said, it's not worth a single blow. Tell me more carefully. Zhu Youjian became interested. Although there were only 3 major camps in the capital camp, in reality, these 3 camps had a population of over 200,000 people. The Ming had to spend a large amount of silver every year to support these 200,000 troops. General Zhou and the last general both came from the 3,000 battalion. Our 3,000 battalion practiced infantry and cavalry formations as usual every morning and evening, but in reality, they could only practice once when the imperial court sent them to supervise the army. Moreover, many officers' horses were moved to the market for sale, and there was a serious shortage of soldiers. When the last general became the commander of the 3,000 battalion, he only had 200 soldiers under his command, which was quite a lot, some of whom only had around 100 soldiers under his command. Zhu Youjian wiped his dry face and frowned, saying, so the 270,000 registered soldiers of the Beijing camp may, well, only be around 100,000. Jia Hua gave a bitter smile and said, Your Majesty is wise. All right, set up the Golden One Palace and go to court. On the square in front of the Golden One Hall, the imperial civil and military officials were already waiting. There was still a slight chill in the sky and earth, which made many elderly officials complain incessantly. Since the courtiers collectively opposed the formation of the northern and southern armies, the emperor has never attended the morning court again, but he has not said to suspend the morning court. This has led to officials waking up early and standing on the square for over half an hour every day in recent days, until the eunuch announced that morning court would be suspended today before they could return home. Just as the ministers were thinking that the court would be closed today, a sharp cry from the eunuch came from in front of the Jin Wan Hall. Your Majesty has an order to announce that all officials will enter the court. Upon hearing these words, the originally scattered officials quickly stood in line and walked up to the main hall under the guidance of Huang Liji, the chief minister of the cabinet. After the 100 officials went to court, Zhu Youjian, surrounded by eunuchs and palace maids, walked up to the Golden One Hall and sat on a dragon chair made of pure gold. Listening to the thunderous sound of the 100 officials' mountain tsunami in his ear, Zhu Youjian lazily yawned. He studied firearms very late last night. Originally, he didn't plan to go to court early today, but then he realized that he had not seen the courtiers for so many days, so it would be better to come up and show his face. Moreover, to deal with matters in the capital camp, he had to say hello to the courtiers. After the officials shouted, "Long live," 3 times, Zhu Youjian gave Wang Chengyan a color. Wang Chengyan knowingly shouted at the top of his throat, "If there is something to report, I will leave court." I have this report. A scholarly official in his 30s stood up, holding an ivory watt and respectfully saluted Zhu Yu, the prosecutor. He said, Yang Weiyuan, the Yunnan provincial governor of the censorate, accused the Minister of War, Cui Qingxiu, of being determined to be corrupt and having a corrupt official. The Hunan imperial censors have always been appointed by individuals with noble conduct, but Cui Qingxiu unilaterally promoted his confidants to take on the role. He also elected his younger brother Cui Ningxiu as the Zhejiang general. Since the founding of the People's Republic of China by Emperor Taizu, there has never been an example of an older brother holding an official position in court and a younger brother holding a heavy army outside. Speaking of this, Yang Weiyuan coldly glanced at Cui Qingxiu. Cui Qingxiu was sweating profusely at this moment. Since he had attached himself to Wei Zhongxian, no one had dared to rebuke him in person, let alone impeach him in front of the emperor in the Jin Wan Palace. At this moment, Yang Weiyuan's official, who was no longer a censor, was clearly a butcher with a knife. As long as the emperor allowed him, his sword would not hesitate to pierce his heart. Seeing that Cui Qingxiu's face was pale, Yang Weiyuan gave a cold smile and continued, Cui Qingxiu made friends with factory officials and had ulterior motives. The official position of the court was just a tool for him to form a clique for personal gain, and all the courtiers became obedient to the people under his lewd influence. His numerous crimes are hard to record, and I request your majesty to execute this person to thank the world. Someone impeached Wei Zhongxian's mastermind. This is truly an unexpected joy. Zhu Yu checked himself and felt refreshed. Yang Weiyuan had an impression of him. Strictly speaking, he helped Wei Zhongxian suppress the Donglin party and was also a member of the Eunuch party. Later, when the Eunuch party fell, he was demoted to Huaiyan prefecture and became an official. After the Qing army captured Nanjing, his whole family died. Judging from his ability to lead his whole family to death, he was also considered a qualified Han person, much stronger than those Donglin party members who were full of benevolence, righteousness, and morality, and immediately went to serve the Manchus as slaves after the Qing army entered the border. But Zhu Youjian thought about it and realized that he couldn't move Cui Qingxiu yet. If he did, he would tear his face off Wei Zhongxian. He then said, Yang Weiyuan slandered the court officials recklessly, and his crime should be punished. However, considering his loyalty, this matter will not be pursued. It's better not to say this once you say it. Many members of the Donglin party's hearts have come to life. With Cui Qingxiu's identity and position, how could such a straightforward and severe impeachment be covered up by a simple statement of not pursuing him? But unfortunately, the emperor just covered it up like this, and the meaning behind it is worth pondering for a moment. Many members of the Donglin party came forward to impeach Cui Qingxiu and state his every wrongdoing. Cui Qingxiu lowered his head, eager to find a crack in the ground, and secretly resented him. At this moment, the Minister of War was impeached by the Donglin party like a bug, and none of the eunuch members stood up to speak for him. Looking at Wei Zhongxian again, he put his hands in his sleeves and looked like an old monk, completely disregarding his face. Looking at the Donglin party members standing out one by one, Zhu Youjian took advantage of the heat to strike the railway and said, "Recently, I have heard that the military in Beijing is lax and has not practiced for many days. The army is severely underpaid, and some even sell their weapons. Cui Qingxiu, as the Minister of War, what should you do?" Zhu Youjian's voice was light and ethereal, but it made Cui Qingxiu fall into an ice cellar, subconsciously looking at Wei Zhongxian. Anything the emperor said was enough for him, the Minister of War, to steal the family and exterminate the family. He couldn't resist this and could only rely on Wei Zhongxian. Wei Zhongxian didn't want Cui Qingxiu to be overthrown, so he bowed to Zhu Youjian and said, "Your Majesty, Cui Qingxiu has commanded the Ministry of War and has fulfilled his responsibilities. As for what your Majesty said, it seems that the people below have only been blinded by the silver." "What do you mean, Wei Qing?" Wei Zhongxian remained expressionless and said, "The old servant suggested that Cui Qingxiu rectify the Beijing camp within a month. If there are still problems in the Beijing camp after a month, it is not too late to hold them accountable." Zhu Youjian narrowed his eyes and hesitated between his eyebrows, but still nodded and said, "Okay, Cui Qingxiu. I am here. I'll give you 1 month to reorganize the Beijing camp. The 3 major camps only need 100,000 people, and I don't want to eat empty pay. I obey the decree." Cui Qingxiu breathed a sigh of relief in his heart. Although reducing the number of soldiers in the Beijing camp would cost him hundreds of thousands of taels of income, he managed to save his life at least. Since the disarmament, the defense around the capital will be empty. The South and North armies will be mobilized to strengthen the defense of the capital. The North Army will be reorganized into the First Army, and the South Army will be reorganized into the Second Army. These 2 armies will be directly commanded by me, and military salaries will also be paid out from internal funds. It's better to disperse. Before Chao could even utter his words, he was interrupted by someone who said, "Your Majesty, this move may not be appropriate. If your Majesty does not trust Cui Qingxiu, he should also choose another talented person to command troops, rather than taking charge of the army himself. The speaker was Wei Liangqing, the nephew of Wei Zhongxian. This rural Han, relying on his relationship with Wei Zhongxian, became a Duke of Ningguo and stood in the court. Wang Yangming risked his life to quell the rebellion of Prince Ning and was granted the title of Xinjian uncle. Wei Liangqing sat at home with both hands spread out, and was granted the title. It was truly better to learn well than to be born well. He did not possess the power and wisdom of his uncle Wei Zhongxian, and rebelled against the emperor in court. Even Wei Zhongxian did not become so arrogant. Sure enough, Wei Zhongxian's face darkened and he hurriedly said, "Your Majesty, don't blame it." Duke Ning of Ningguo was quick-witted and didn't express himself properly. "I hope your Majesty can forgive me." Zhu Youjian ignored him and stared straight at Wei Liangqing. "Then you say, who can lead the two armies?" Crown Prince Taisher Tian Urging is old and steady, capable of commanding two armies, Wei Liangqing said without even thinking. The two furrowed dog oil beards at the corner of his mouth trembled with pride, as if Zhu Youjian had to listen to him. The Crown Prince and Grand Tutor were officials of the Eastern Palace, and most of the time they were in vain positions. However, Tian Urging was one of the 5 powerful eunuchs of the Eunuch party and a capable general of Wei Zhongxian. He was known as the heir Tian Urging at that time, and in private, he often sent silver to Wei Liangqing. If Wei Liangqing spoke respectfully, it wouldn't be a big deal, but his arrogant demeanor when he spoke seemed like he was the master of the Ming Dynasty, and Zhu Youjian sitting on the throne had to listen to him. "Someone, come on." With a command, Jia Hua and 4 samurai in front of the palace rushed quickly to the hall. Zhu Youjian pointed at Wei Liangqing and said, "Duke of Ningguo, Wei Liangqing, is arrogant and unrestrained, with no ruler in his sight. I deeply hate him," and immediately dismissed Duke of Ningguo from his position and drag him out of the Noon Gate. Chapter 8. Stingy Father.in.law. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Speaking of this, Zhu Youjian stopped. He wanted to say that he would pull out the Meridian Gate and behead him, but that was no different from tearing his face at Wei Zhongxian. After Wei Zhongxian suppressed him, most of the eunuchs in the court were now members of his eunuch party. The people of the Donglin party no longer dared to confront Wei Zhongxian head-on, and the remaining 2 or 3 cats could only let out a few small shouts according to his wishes. Seeing Zhu Youjian pause, Wei Liangqing chuckled and said, "If your surname Zhu, you should try moving me. My uncle helped you up, and if he wanted to pull you down, he would pull you down. I beg you to move me and give me a try, haha." The arrogant laughter completely angered Zhu Youjian, and he said angrily, "Drag out the Meridian Gate, use a heavy staff. Keep hitting. Kill until you die. I will comply with the order." Jia Hua responded with a resounding voice, and 4 warriors rushed to Wei Liangqing's side behind him. The 2 of them tied his arms around him, while the other 2 reached out and took off Wei Liangqing's black robe. In a few breaths, they took off Wei Liangqing's robe. All he had left was a white inner garment, with a disheveled appearance resembling a demon. Even when he was dragged down by Jia Shi, he cursed and said, "Zhu, you son of a bitch, dare to touch me. You're done, you're done. Uncle, save me, save me." Zhu Youjian's face became increasingly ugly, and he reached out to point at Wei Zhongxian. "Wei Zhongxian, your nephew said you could pull me off the throne at any time. I know you control the capital camp and the royal guards. I'll give you a chance to mobilize them to attack." Zhu Youjian drank away his power directly, and Wei Zhongxian's face became very complicated. He knelt down in front of Zhu Youjian on both knees and kowtowed, saying, "Your Majesty, calm down. Wei Liangqing's death is worth it, but the old servant is absolutely loyal to your Majesty and has no ulterior motives." Seeing that the emperor was still angry, Wei Zhongxian could only say, "I am willing to beg the emperor for bones and return to my hometown to recuperate in heaven." Wei Zhongxian's humble attitude made Zhu Youjian feel a bit angry, but Wei Zhongxian's words made him feel as uncomfortable as eating a dead cockroach. Where is Wei Zhongxian's hometown? Suning, northern Jili. Returning to his hometown for retirement, if Wei Zhongxian does not leave Jili, he can control the court wherever he goes. Zhu Youjian waved his sleeve and said, since you are an old minister of the four dynasties, go to Hanzhong, Shaanxi, and become the governor. You will never be allowed to return to Beijing for life. Wei Zhongxian breathed a sigh of relief upon hearing this sentence, saying that he must never return to the capital for life. His Majesty has no intention of killing him. Wei Zhongxian knew better than anyone that he could indeed command over 100,000 people, but those 100,000 people would never dare to attack the Forbidden City. The rule of the Ming Dynasty for over 200 years was deeply ingrained in people's hearts. If his soldiers knew they were going to attack the Forbidden City and kill the emperor, they would definitely mutiny. Most soldiers did not even have the courage to approach the Forbidden City. Perhaps one day the Ming Empire will fall, but it is not at the hands of Wei Zhongxian, who lacks the courage and ability to rebel. Before the fruit is ripe, anyone who picks it can only taste a bite of sourness. The old slave received an edict to express gratitude. Wei Zhongxian slowly pushed out of the main hall and heard Zhu Youjian's cold voice. Take Su Yingyuan with you, you can also be a companion on the way. Wei Zhongxian left, Zhu Youjian sat on the dragon chair, his gaze scanning the faces of each minister. The members of the eunuch party had a pitiful expression on their faces. Wei Zhongxian had left, what should they do? Should we go to welcome the Donglin party members or wait for the day when Wei Zhongxian returns? At this moment, Jia Hua held a seedling sword and quickly ran to the hall, clasping his fists and saying, Your Majesty, Wei Liangqing has been subdued. Okay. Zhu Youjian dealt a heavy blow to the festival, hang his head on the city gate, and let all the subjects of the world see what will happen to those without a ruler. Follow the instructions. The members of the Donglin party were overjoyed one by one, and they couldn't believe their ears. Wei Liangqing died, and the 9,000-year-old who was pressing on their heads was easily sent to Hanzhong. Next, as long as they welcomed the famous party members such as Qian Qianni and Wen Tiren back to the court, wouldn't the other eunuch members let them play with them? Someone stood up and said, Your Majesty, Wei Zhongxian has left. Your Majesty lacks a close official to assist in politics. I suggest that you recall Qian Longxi, Wen Tiren, and Qian Qianni to the court to share your worries. I'll think twice about this matter. All right, leave the court. After speaking, Zhu walked towards the back hall from the inspector's hand. I respectfully bid farewell to your Majesty. Upon arriving at the back hall, Zhu Youjian stumbled and almost fell to the ground. Wang Chengyan quickly stepped forward to assist him. Zhu Youjian took a deep breath and pushed Wang Chengyan away, saying, Now is the time for eunuchs to change their minds, and they can now come into contact with middle-level figures. Wang Chengyan nodded and said, I will do it immediately. Zhu Youjian, supported by 2 eunuchs, arrived at Cunning Palace. Cunning Palace is the Empress's sleeping quarters, named after the phrase, Kuan de Yi Ning, in the Tao Te Ching, hence the name Cunning Palace. Similarly, Tian de Yi Qing, the Emperor's sleeping quarters are named Qianqing Palace. Since Zhu Youjian became emperor, he has spent most of his time in the Hall of Nurturing the Heart. Not to mention the Cunning Palace, he never stayed overnight in his own Qianqing Palace. The emperor has arrived. Accompanied by a eunuch's long cry, Zhu Youjian walked confidently into the palace. The palace was filled with a faint fragrance of jasmine, and upon hearing the command, the person was refreshed. A luxurious Empress Zhou and a plump middle-aged man with peach blossom eyes stood side by side at the entrance of the palace, bowing in to greet him. Empress Zhou was wearing a snow-white long dress, with a silver necklace embedded with gemstones on her fair neck. It was sent by Zhu Youjian and was also her favorite accessory. Her beautiful appearance was slightly pink and even more enchanting. The man next to her looked around 30, dressed in bright red embroidered clothes, with a slightly chubby face and a pair of small peach blossom eyes shining with a smooth expression. He wore gold on his neck and fingers, and even his clothes were golden. He looked like a nouveau riche, and he was Zhou Kuei, the father of Empress Zhou. Zhu Youjian had an impression of this father-in-law. At the end of the Chongzhen reign, the court's finances collapsed. Emperor Chongzhen begged his grandfather and grandmother to raise money everywhere, but Zhou Kuei, as the father-in-law, did not donate even 1 or 2 silver coins. Later, his daughter called him to the cunning palace and scolded him before donating 5,000 taels. Finally, Empress Zhou saw that he was stingy and secretly sold her jewelry in exchange for 5,000 taels of silver for Zhou Kuei to donate. After receiving her daughter's silver, Zhou Kuei deducted 2,000 taels from it and handed over the remaining 3,000 taels of silver to the national treasury. Later, when Li Zicheng conquered Beijing, Zhou Kuei and his entire family were arrested and imprisoned. His wife and daughter-in-law were forced to hang themselves, his eldest son was killed, and he, along with his second son and nephew, were subjected to severe torture and almost lost their lives. They had to hand over a huge sum of 3 million silver coins and all their property, and returned home feeling depressed and eventually died. As the father-in-law, he was so stingy that he eventually became the laughing-stock of the world. My concubine pays her respects to your majesty. Empress Zhou Yingying bowed, and Zhu Youjian waved his hand to signal her to wave the salute. He sat down on the couch without hesitation, with a forced smile on his face as he looked at Zhou Kuei. Why did the father-in-law come? Let's take a look at my daughter, and also discuss something with my virtuous son-in-law. Zhou Kuei didn't consider himself an outsider either. He sat directly next to Zhu Youjian and rubbed his hands, saying, "Dear son-in-law, we have a pawnshop, and the pawnshop manager paid a little less tax. Just tell me, because of this, the North City Army and Horse Department came to arrest people. The North City Army and Horse Commander is still an unfriendly guy. When I talked about our relationship with Wang's son-in-law, he not only refused to let people go but also kicked me out. I came to find you as soon as I didn't have any moves. The North City Army and Horse Division is a part of the 5 cities Army and Horse Division, each with 1 commander and 4 deputy commanders. Dad, didn't we agree not to tell your majesty about this matter?" Empress Zhou complained. Zhu Youjian smiled and said, "What should I do? This matter is easy to handle. Who is the commander of the North City Army?" Upon hearing about his connections, Zhou Kuei was overjoyed and said, "It's a person named Bai Ling. I've already told you about our relationship with Wang's son-in-law, and he even kicked me out. You must treat this kind of person well, extinction. Law. Otherwise, anyone will dare to bully our family in the future. Clear, clear." Zhu Youjian chuckled and said, "Master Gua, you also know that I have issued an order to waive the 3-year tax in Shaanxi, and Hunan provinces, and have the tax in other provinces within 3 years. In recent years, the maximum tax revenue has been 1,100,000 taels. I have to train the army and purchase military equipment, which is really a bit tight. Master Gua, do you think so?" Zhu Youjian kept hinting with his eyes, the meaning was very obvious, take the money. As soon as he heard that he wanted to take the money himself, Zhou Kuei's face changed. His original deep affection for his son-in-law instantly disappeared. "Your Majesty, no one forced you to comply with the tax exemption decree. Also, don't think I don't know. There are at least a few million taels of internal funds left by the late emperor for you. You are so tight, I haven't asked you for money yet, but you asked me for money. I won't give it." The last 2 words were very firm. When Empress Zhou didn't listen well, his father's stinginess as a merchant broke again. He quickly bent down and said to Zhu Yu, "Your Majesty, forgive me. My father only cares about money and has my concubine persuade him. He will also use some money to deposit into the national treasury. Zhou Kuei looked like a cat with its tail stepped on and jumped up. What money should I take? You silly girl, how can you turn your elbow out? Your father and I earn hard money, and we all wish we could break a copper coin in half. Are you still encouraging me to take the money? Your Majesty, hurry up and have the North City Army in Horse Division release the person. If I have something else to do, I'll leave first. Stop. Zhu Youjian stopped him and calmly approached him. After helping Zhou Kuei sit down on the couch, he looked at him with a smile and said, Abbot, if you say you earn hard money, then we need to talk carefully. Originally, you were just a poor man on the streets of Suzhou who made a living by practicing medicine and divination. It was I who brought your daughter into the Prince Xian's mansion, allowing your Zhou Kuei family to live a prosperous life. If I hadn't been your support these years, how could you, as a dilapidated resident of Suzhou, earn so much money today? Also, tax evasion is not a small matter. According to my Ming Dynasty calendar, being greedy for ink for 40 guan can result in execution. Your shop owner must have paid more than 40 guan less, and he also evaded taxes. This is drinking the blood of my Ming Dynasty. Such people should be skinned and cramped. Zhu Youjian became more and more angry as he spoke, so he stood up and pointed at Zhou Kuei's nose, cursing, Let me tell you, Zhou. If it weren't for your title as a national father.in.law, then Bai Ling wouldn't have let you leave the door of the North City Army and Horse Department. You still have the face to come to me and ask me to release you. Now, I will tell you that the tax evader will be executed by the North City Military and Horse Department with extreme punishment, and the White Feather will be executed by the Duke. I will transfer him to serve in the Royal Guards, and you can go back and guard your money waiting for the Royal Guards to come. After speaking, Zhu Youjian walked out of the hall without mercy. Empress Zhou reached out to pull her, but he pushed her away in anger. Chapter 9. 3 Strategies for the Eunuch Party. You are listening at novelfull.audio. In the mansion of Ningguo, Wei Zhongxian sat on the purple sandalwood Grand Preceptor's chair depicting dragons and phoenixes, his simple and wooden face showing signs of fatigue. He held a cup of already cold tea in his hand, and the death of his nephew reminded him that Emperor Chongzhen was not Emperor Tianqi. Their eunuchs could no longer be as arrogant as Emperor Tianqi, otherwise more people would die in the future. Perhaps it was time to delegate power. He was accompanied by the main members of the eunuch party, including Cui Qingxiu, Hou Guoxing, Li Chaoqin, Tian Erjing, Wang Tiqian, and more than 10 others. As soon as they left the court, they came to the Ningguo mansion to pay their respects to Wei Zhongxian. If Wei Zhongxian left, the eunuch party would be leaderless and likely face the fate of extinction. Wei Zhongxian remained silent, and the room was quiet and frightening. Cui Qingxiu couldn't help but speak up, If I had to say that, we would have rebelled and turned against his mother. Zhu Youjian's army wouldn't make a profit of 10,000. As long as you command us to attack the city of Beijing with more than 10,000 people, seizing the throne is just a matter of hand. Even if you add 100 years to your life, you can become the supreme Wansui. Cui Shangshu's words make sense. His emperor was still established by you when he was 9,000 years old. As long as you give me a command, I will go and mobilize troops, Hou Guoxing continued. Other people spoke out one after another to persuade them to move forward. They relied on Wei Zhongxian to plan a good future. If Wei Zhongxian really sat in that supreme position, they were all ministers of the dragon, and their status could be improved accordingly. It can be said that Wei Zhongxian at this moment is the closest outsider to the throne since the founding of the Ming Dynasty. Wei Zhongxian took a sip of his tea and scanned the crowd with complex thoughts. He wanted to say that being an emperor, which he had never thought of, was a lie. 89 out of 10 Chinese martial arts in the inner court were his people, and he was also his people in the tens of thousands of capital camps outside. The prefectures of various states also tried to curry favor with him, and even honored him as 9,900 years old, only 100 years away from Wansui. But he knew he couldn't do it. The local governors only flattered him because they saw him as a close vassal of the emperor, vying to repair his ancestral temple. If he really dared to rebel, these foreign ministers would surely destroy his ancestral temple as soon as possible and draw a clear line with him. Not to mention the foreign ministers, let's just talk about the people in this room. There are also a few who sincerely follow him, not all for money and power. There are also over 100,000 soldiers from the Beijing camp and soldiers from the royal guards who were dispatched by him. If anyone were to be asked, they would all say they were subjects of the emperor, not his 9,000-year-old subjects. The righteousness of the Ming Dynasty is unprecedented in ancient times. Even if a eunuch had great power, he could not overthrow this empire. Wei Zhongxian is aware of this, so His Majesty will send him to Hanzhong for him to endure. Rebellion is destined to fail. Those who have this idea should seize it early. We can trap the emperor in Beijing, but if anyone dares to move the emperor, the boiling tide of the world will surely engulf us. Then we can't just sit and wait for death. Cui Qingxiu said urgently. The emperor had already developed dissatisfaction with him. If it weren't for Wei Zhongxian pleading, he might have been removed as the Minister of War in the morning. If Wei Zhongxian wasn't here, how could the emperor let him go? Of course, we cannot sit idly by. Wei Zhongxian said, Your Majesty asked me to form a firearm camp. I can still use this to stay in Beijing for a few days. In these days, you have to do 3 things. First, kill Wang Qingyan and Jia Hua. If Your Majesty wants to move us, they will be Your Majesty's knives. Secondly, joint efforts are being made to force the members of the Donglin party who are currently in power to step down, leaving His Majesty with no one to use except for us. If any foreign ministers enter the court in the future, you must also work together to drive them away, so as to ensure that our position remains unshakable. Thirdly, after successfully completing the first 2 tasks, everyone will donate half of their wealth to Your Majesty. In the future, no matter what Your Majesty does, you must do your best to support and ease our relationship with him, so as to ensure our safety. Wang Tiqian heard the sadness in Wei Zhongxian's tone and said urgently, 9,000 years old, do you really plan to retire in Hanzhong in the future? Our men all rely on you. Wei Zhongxian looked at him and said, Wang Tiqian, do you know how old our family is? Well, Qian Suiyi, you should be 50 years old, said Wang Tiqian with uncertainty. Wei Zhongxian sneered and said, in 4 more months, our family's 60th birthday will come. In his golden age, he will see everything clearly. There is no need to be obsessed with money and power in life. Whether it is glory or glory before death, all he can bring with him is a coffin. I am already old. Instead of rebelling and proclaiming myself emperor, it would be better to follow Your Majesty's orders and become a leisurely governor in Hanzhong to spend my later years peacefully. Why bother rebelling and leaving a lasting reputation? When I arrive in Hanzhong, don't bother me with court affairs anymore. I will wholeheartedly raise Pengyi, the son of Wei Liangqing. Alright, let's all go, Qian Suiyi. Let's all go and leave our house quiet. At the same time, inside the heart-nourishing hall, Zhu stood with the body of the maintenance chief holding his arm and suddenly said, draft an edict. Wang Qingyan dared not neglect and quickly spread out a bright yellow edict, holding up his pen and waiting for orders. When Tiran from Huzhou, Chen Bangyan from Guangdong, Li Suiqiu from Panyu, Chen Zizhuang from Guangzhou, and Shi Kefa from Hunan were ordered to enter the court and be called upon. Zhu Youjian spoke 12 names in a row before finishing. Most of the people he mentioned were around 30, with a few already holding the status of scholars or jinshi. Only one person, Wen Tiran, had the highest achievement and was already a backbone of the Donglin party. Zhu Youjian originally did not want to recruit members of the Donglin party to enter the court. After all, in a sense, the Donglin party was not as good as the Eunuch party. However, in order to confuse the courtiers, he could only add Wen Tiran and Zhou Yenru. Anyway, the purpose of the edict was to enter the court and listen to it. As for what officials to give, it would have to be discussed later. Wang Qingyan finished writing the last word, dried the ink, and said, "Your Majesty, I will have someone deliver the message." "Wait a moment, there is another decree. Wang Qingyan is kind to others, leading him to take charge of the East Assassination Factory and the North City Army Commander by Ling. He is rigorous and fearless of power, and has been appointed as the commander of the Royal Guards. He will take office immediately." After speaking, Zhu Youjian breathed a sigh of relief and said, "All right, Jia Hua will accompany me on the street. It is not a small matter for the emperor to go on a tour. Usually, he needs to be notified a few days in advance, and then the imperial army will block the route that the emperor passes by to investigate potential threats. After a few days, the emperor will pass by on the road. Even if he is in the city, he needs to be notified a few hours in advance, and then the imperial army will investigate the danger. But there's no need to be so troublesome for Zhu Youjian's private visit, just change into casual clothes with a few guards such as Jia Hua. He has been to Beijing more than 300 years later, but he has never visited Beijing more than 300 years ago. Although Ming Dynasty Beijing did not have the towering buildings of later generations, it still has a unique historical charm. Strolling on Xingyang Street, there are 2 or 3 floors of Ming Dynasty small buildings on both sides, with restaurants, brothels, gambling houses, and various entertainment venues. The vendors on both sides of the street are constantly shouting, showcasing the prosperity of the imperial capital. At this time, Beijing was undoubtedly the world's largest city. Looking at everything, there was no city that could rival Beijing. Everything on the streets made Zhu Youjian very curious. He looked around and felt like a country bumpkin entering the city. Behind him, Jia Hua was dressed in inconspicuous black clothes, holding a seedling knife wrapped in cloth strips. He followed Zhu Youjian without saying a word, dressed like a domestic slave, but his sharp eyes were unforgettable. Jia Hua, which is the largest restaurant in the city. Zhu Youjian picked up a sugar man and licked it deliciously. Drunken Immortal Tower, opened by the abbot of the country. He drove it. Zhu Youjian was stunned for a moment and then smiled. "Let's go, take a look." Chapter 10. Restaurant Madness. You are listening at novelfull.audio. The Drunken Immortal Tower is located on Shuangfu Street in the east of the city. The pedestrians on the street are all distinguished, and the Drunken Immortal Tower is not like a typical restaurant that arranges assistants to attract customers in front of its door. Only when you enter, will the assistants greet you. The decoration on the first floor of the building is extremely luxurious, and the statue of the god of wealth carved with only gold on the wall behind the counter is particularly prominent. A beautiful woman lazily leans on the counter, with a purple belly pocket in front of her, which is particularly eye-catching. Apart from the belly pocket, there is only a transparent purple veil left. As soon as she turns around, her snow-white spine will be understood by this man in the hall. Most of the men on this floor are probably coming towards her. "2 gentlemen, please come inside." As soon as Zhu Youjian entered, a staff member warmly welcomed him. This guy had already developed a pair of wise eyes to greet high-ranking officials, and at a glance, he could guess your identity roughly. Zhu Youjian has a beautiful appearance and extraordinary temperament. He holds a folding fan and writes, "Quiet Ziyuan," on it. He is obviously born in a scholarly family. He is dressed in white clothes rather than snow. Not everyone can afford to wear a belt with 12 pieces of white marble around his waist. He has a golden purple fish bag hanging around his waist, which is obviously from a noble family. With just one glance, the waiter had a clear idea in his heart. Looking at the attendant behind Zhu Youjian, Jia Hua was 21 years old and in his prime. He was as sharp as an unsheathed sword. Although the Miao Dao in his arms was wrapped in cloth, everyone could tell that it was a weapon. Daring to bring weapons out of the city of Beijing clearly has a good reason. "2 gentlemen, which floor are you going up to?" Zhu Youjian said. "Why, what else is there to say on which floor? The 2 gentlemen must have just arrived in the capital." Zhu Youjian smiled and said, I am from Nanjing and have traveled with my attendants. I have gained a lot of knowledge. The shop assistant introduced with an expression that was rightfully given. On this floor, most people eat from the wealthy, on the second floor they eat from the wealthy, and on the third floor they eat from the privileged. As for these 4 floors, don't play tricks, speak quickly. These 4 floors are only accessible to real dignitaries. Every time our shop owner sits with us, they are usually empty and don't open them for any amount of money. Shopkeeper, is she? Zhu Youjian pointed to the purple-bellied woman in the counter. Grandpa, quickly let go. The shop assistant was about to reach out and let Zhu Youjian let go. Jia Hua let out a cold snort and placed the weapon horizontally between the two. The shop assistant had to stop and whispered, "Her name is Lin Zian, and she is the mistress of our big shopkeeper. She usually manages the big shopkeeper when he is not in this drunken immortal building. This woman has the smallest heart. If she hates her, it won't be easy to end up. Your noble background naturally doesn't matter, but it's also troublesome to get into trouble, isn't it? Thank you for the reminder." Zhu Youjian patted the waiter's shoulder and said, "Find a place for us on the first floor and serve a few signature dishes. Money is not a problem. Okay, gentlemen, please come this way." The Drunken Immortal Tower is truly the largest restaurant in Beijing. Just as Zhu Youjian sat down for a while, he served the wine and dishes. Zhu Youjian took a few random sips, and there were many rare dishes from ancient times. Zhu Youjian had only heard of them in his past life and had never seen them before. At least these exquisite dishes on the table were not seen by Zhu Youjian in his previous life's restaurants. He picked up a chopstick and put it into his mouth, leaving a lingering fragrance in his mouth. Especially the roasted duck that was ultimately chopped and served was even more delicious than what Zhu Youjian had eaten in Quanzhou in his previous life. The tender duck meat was gently chewed, leaving a lingering fragrance on his lips and teeth, making it impossible to stop chopping. Eating small dishes and scanning the crowd in the tavern, those who could eat inside were all the petty bourgeoisie, mostly dressed in silk, not as noisy as ordinary taverns. Only a scholar from the table next door, Zhu Youjian, got drunk and stepped on a chair, raising his glass and loudly saying to his desk mates, "Listen to me, my great Ming has many shortcomings, and the most serious one is the 8-legged selection of scholars. This selection only imprisons the thoughts of scholars all over the world and traps them in ignorance. We have been studying history for more than 10 years, and when we point out the shortcomings of the great Ming, I suggest that we visit the prime minister of that dynasty after drinking this cup together to clarify our views." The drunken man's words were like a bolt from the blue, and everyone around him looked at the drunken man's table with the eyes of a fool. The Ming Dynasty was open-minded, and scholars could discuss court politics on the street, but there was really no one like this drunken man who openly criticized the court's talent selection system. A table of diners threw down an ingot of silver and got up to leave. If the officials heard this madman, they would also be implicated. Lin Zian at the counter also heard the drunk's words. She leaned in and came out of the counter, pointing at the drunk's nose from a distance and cursing, "Where did you come to our drunken immortal tower to talk nonsense? Someone kicked him out." After finishing speaking, a few colleagues rolled up their sleeves and walked over. Several literati at the drunken table got up and apologized to Lin Zian, saying, "Shopkeeper, my friend has had a few more drinks and there's no gatekeeper on his mouth. We'll just sit for a while and then leave." "No, hurry up and get him away. If he's talking nonsense and the officials hear him, wouldn't it not implicate us in the drunken immortal tower? Boss, we guarantee that if he says any more nonsense, we will take him away immediately and never cause you any trouble." Lin Zian saw the several literati with extremely low postures and was about to let go when the drunken literati stood up, trembling and leisurely taking 2 steps before suddenly turning around, pointing at Lin Zian and shouting in front of her, "It's shameless for a woman to wear such revealing clothes. If you ask me to say that it's better for a woman to find a man to have a new child than anything else, and to come out and show off like you do, wouldn't this world be chaotic? Don't you know that a woman without talent is virtuous? You. Lin Zian was furious and slapped him in the face as she went up, muttering, "Damn it, if I hit you without talent, it's virtue." She couldn't get enough of it on her own, so she turned around and said to several of her colleagues, "Let's go together and beat this ignorant old lady." A few buddies were ordered to rush up and beat around the drunken scholar with a loud bang. The people accompanying the drunken scholar were all scholars and couldn't stop them at all. The diners at the nearby table also stood on the sidelines, not intending to meddle in this matter. Zhu Youjian looked at the drunken scholar who was being beaten up, his slender fingers gently scraping against his smooth chin, and his thoughts swirled in his mind. In later generations, people have heard the saying that a woman without talent is virtuous, but no one in the Ming Dynasty has heard of it. This sentence was passed down during the late Ming and early Qing dynasties. He remembers that the person who said this eventually became the first master of prose in the Ming and Qing dynasties, praised by later generations for having the sharpness of piercing the world with arrogance and the playfulness of playing with things. Isn't this the guy? Jia Hua. Zhu Yujian let out a soft shout, and Jia Hua understood. He immediately got up and walked over, kicking a guy in the chest with a strong force. He kicked the guy more than 3 meters away and knocked down another table. Several diners at that table quickly got up and hid far away, afraid of causing trouble. On this side, Jia Hua used both elbows and pushed several of the guys who were beating the drunken man aside with a few thrusts. Lin Zian was grabbed by him and mercilessly thrown to the side, falling with her hands and feet facing upwards. "Are you okay?" Jia Hua helped the drunkard up, and a hint of blood flowed from the corner of his mouth. He forced a smile and said, "Thank you very much. Thank you very much for your help, brothers. This grace is something that Zhang will repay in the future." The woman's heart was the most narrow-minded. Lin Zian struggled to get up and looked at the group of guys lying on the ground around her, saying in a resentful voice, "A bunch of useless things." After speaking, he crossed his hands and shouted, Someone has come to our drunken immortal tower to cause trouble." With this greeting, more than 10 companions gathered around one after another, and Lin Zian's momentum grew stronger. She pointed at Jia Hua and the drunken man next to him and said, "Just these 2 guys, give me a hard fight." "Yes." The guys waved their fists and rushed forward, with a strong momentum of knocking Jia Hua down. A hint of disdain flashed in Jia Hua's eyes, and he placed the seedling sword horizontally on his chest, pulling it hard, exposing his snow white blade like cold water to the air. Seeing the dazzling blade, the staff of the drunken immortal tower dared not move it on the spot. It was okay for them to gather together and fight. Anyway, the owner was responsible for the incident, but they didn't have the courage to fight with the sword-wielding warriors. Jia Hua gave a cold smile and took out a sign from his arms, saying arrogantly, "I am the Imperial Guards. We are in charge of this person, the Royal Guards. Please mind your own business. Although a person is fake, a brand is real." Upon hearing that the person in front of them was the Royal Guards, a dozen or so staff members hurriedly retreated a long distance. The glorious reputation of the Royal Guards had a considerable deterrent effect on these ordinary people, but Lin Zian looked at Jia Hua with a sneer on her face and said an astonishing sentence.